So when I was young, I liked to read biographies. Maybe I read most of them, at least for juvenile nonfiction, in the Guilford Free Library. And my favorite biographies were of great Americans. I liked George Washington, Amelia Earhart, Thomas Edison, Benjamin Franklin. And later, my heroes and my heroines as great Americans were closer to home, like Agnes Dickinson Lee, Captain Oliver N. Brooks of Faulkner's Island, Charles D. Hubbard, author and artist. But over the last 25 or 30 years, and even in recent years, when frequently thinking about Dr. C. Adams, Dr. Elisabeth C. Adams, I realized too that she was a great American. She never had a town-wide funeral. She never had a memorial service open to the public. And this was at her direction. This has given me and others, I think, some lingering emptiness over the years. And so it is tonight. I think her story needs to be told more fully. Told and retold to be remembered, and remembered to be cherished as a great American. Dr. Adams was legendary. We all know that, in the sense that her practice of medicine in Guilford lasted 37 years without interruption. Her home office had a virtual open-door policy, 24/7, day and night. Much of her practice was dedicated to house calls for homebound, shut-in patients. She responded when needed, instantly and personally, often without appointments, and way beyond the call of duty. Dr. Adams invested her community with benefaction and philanthropy, often anonymously. She consoled, she counseled. She could combine skilled medical attention with rare compassion and reassurance. She knew how to meet spiritual needs. She did not seek fame or glory, but selflessly became a giver to anyone and everyone, setting daily examples, perhaps for all of us to live by. She earned our deep and abiding respect for a warm and humane spirit. This portrait, should I say, of Doc Adams was taken in 1965. Elisabeth C. Adams was born and raised in Willsboro, New York, a small town in upper New York State in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains. As you can see from this map, little Willsboro, way up in New York, bordered on Lake Champlain. And the population of Willsboro has never, even to this day, exceeded 2,000 people. In 1982, I made a 7-day trip to the Adirondack Mountain region with time spent in Willsboro to visit the Adams farmhouse. And this is it in my photo taken on black and white 35 millimeter film in 1982. I went to the local library and I went to meet Dr. Adams' closest relative, a first cousin, named Festus Smith, and his wife. The farmhouse was still standing at that time in its original condition. Frank Adams, her father, who lived in this house with Dr. Adams' wife Dora and Doc Adams, also had grown up on this farm, which encompassed 365 acres of woodland and pasture. Frank Adams was a farmer. He He kept about 15 head of cattle. Now this is what Doc Adams told me. A team of workhorses, sheep, pigs, and chickens. Milk was carried in large cans to the cooperative creamery nearby in the little town of Reber, R-E-B-E-R. Eggs were carried to the store and put on credit for purchase of merchandise. Frank and Dora Adams, the parents of Dr. Adams, were dedicated to their only child, Elisabeth. Mr. Adams was active in the Methodist Church and in town affairs, not as a politician, but as a sturdy, upright citizen. There are stories about his sterling honesty. He and his wife hosted Methodist prayer meetings in their farmhouse in Willsboro. During my trip to Willsboro in 1982, Doc Adams said I must meet Maud Kehoe, K-E-H-O-E. And this is Maud Kehoe, who hosted me for a part of the day. At 90 years of age, at that time, she owned the Adams farmhouse. Her husband, Daniel Kehoe, had worked for Frank Adams as a young hired farmhand. Now, in those days, at least in Willsboro, according to Dr. Adams, women and girls seldom participated in the farm chores. Dora and Frank Adams hired French-Canadian farmhands who lived over their woodshed. The Adams farmhouse has scarcely changed to this day. And for those of you who ever visit Little Willsboro, the property address is 213-213 Mountain View Drive, on the outskirts of Willsboro. The property owner is now identified as Apostles Infinity Love, Inc., an independent Catholic group that uses the place as a religious retreat. So I was fortunate in the 80s to borrow from Doc Adams an old photo album. And on 35 millimeter film, long before flatbed scanners, I copied everything onto film. And here is Doc Adams, the earliest photo we could find, born August 18th, 1905. Since the remote Adams farmhouse had no electricity, Dora Adams, her mother, lodged with her parents, the Smiths, in the village center of Willsboro for Doc Adams' birthing. Elisabeth grew up knowing the rigors of farm life. The seclusion of the farm prevented her from having many playmates, according to Doc Adams. She followed gentle pastimes, such as riding their old horse Kit or playing with dolls. 10-year-old Elisabeth, in this photo, is wearing the white dress and holds the reins. And then in the album, there's a photo of Elisabeth Adams at 11 years of age. Then Elisabeth Adams at 12 years of age with her father. And then yet another shot of Elisabeth at 13 years of age at her maternal grandparents' camp on the shore of Lake Champlain. You can see the lake in the background. The health of Elisabeth's father broke, and he was forced to sell the Willsboro farm in 1917. This was a traumatic event in the Adams family's life. The family passed the winter in Washington, D.C. in 1918 when this photograph was taken. And Dr. Adams told me that it was, quote, a lovely experience in D.C. because she and her father left every morning to spend the day sightseeing in the capital city. Frequently, they sat in the balcony of the Capitol building listening to Senate debates. Here, Elisabeth contracted the measles, which she passed on to her father, and in his weakened state, he died soon after this photo was taken, according to Dr. Adams. Dr. Adams never reconciled this tragic event and even talked about it often. And I've often believed that throughout her life she looked up to anybody who might have been a father figure to her. Elisabeth's early education was received in this one-room schoolhouse. It looks a tad bit like the Clobber Hill Schoolhouse or any of our other district schoolhouses in Guilford. And the schoolhouse adjoined the Adams Farm in Willsboro. It was known as Willsboro District School Number 4. In a tailspin after Frank Adams' death at only 57 years of age, Dora Adams and her daughter Elisabeth moved to West Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Upon invitation of a friend, Elisabeth had just completed 8th grade. Here she was enrolled in Howard Seminary, a private boarding school for girls. She spent 4 years at the seminary and received a little Boston culture, according to Dr. Adams. But she yearned for a liberal arts education. She graduated from Wellesley College in 1926. But she worked 7 summers at the Grand Harborview Hotel, Martha's Vineyard, both during and after her Wellesley School experience. And to quote Dr. Adams, she said, medicine was the last thing I ever thought of. Although she did major in physics, which would make you think that she was headed for a medical education afterwards. But in the kitchen of this hotel, and this is a vintage picture, probably around 1900, or soon after, around the time that Doc Adams was there, college students worked in the kitchen hotel. And many of them were medical students. And one of her acquaintances in the kitchen extolled glories of such good times in medical school that Elisabeth thought it would be fun to try the same. And that's exactly what happened. Now, medical school was expensive, then as now. And before Elisabeth Adams started Cornell University Medical College, first in Ithaca and then in New York, she earned her master's degree in New York University. And then she entered the teaching profession even before she began her freshman year at Cornell. She taught physics and geometry in New Jersey. She taught English to foreigners in New York City. And after 5 years of teaching, Doc Adams said she saved $2,500 to continue her education. She graduated from Cornell with a class of 1934. Now, and I have a yardstick. I want to show you Doc Adams. I think most of your eyes can't see this from where you are, but this came from the former medical school library. There's Dr. Adams right here. It's a little bit fuzzy, but that's Doc Adams. But I want you to zero in on this guy, Leroy Wardner. Wardner. He was the father of Mrs. Colin Bradford from Dramara Road in Guilford. And I interviewed Dr. Wardner in 1989 about his memories of Dr. Adams in medical school. And he started knowing her when they worked at adjoining dissecting tables in medical school. And my, what stories I have there. But he referred to her carriage and, in other words, the way she behaved. He said that Elisabeth was frumpy. F-R-U-M-P-Y. Now, that's an interesting adjective. I didn't really completely look it up, but I have a fair idea. In other words, Doc Adams, according to Dr. Wardner, had no concern for her dress and had none of the trappings of the women who were on make, according to Dr. Wardner. And this is the reason, Dr. Wardner said, that the male medical students, and you can see there were only a few female medical students at that time, they were always trying to kid her and embarrass her. But it didn't work. According to Dr. Wardner, every joke they played on Elisabeth, she revenged them with double punch. And those are more stories. I think one time, one of the stories was that the men kidded her about going to a burlesque show. This again was in Cornell. And they kidded her so much that she bought them tickets to a burlesque show. And Dr. Adams accompanied them, but sat in the balcony away from the men who were having a good time at the burlesque show. And afterwards, they went up on stage, the male medical students, to meet the women, but they were really men dressed as women. And Dr. Adams was howling in the balcony, according to Dr. Wardner, but that was one of her tricks. And so, contrary to popular opinion, Dr. Adams did not come to Guilford to retire. She moved here because she had her fill of life in New York City. As she said, parking was a tremendous problem. And she was sick and tired of carrying an EKG machine around on the subways, and tired of waiting for stoplights to turn green. Those were exact words. So for 10 years in New York City after medical school, Dr. Adams worked for Dr. Connie Guion, Guion. And you can check Dr. Guion in Wikipedia on Google. Dr. Guion revolutionized outpatient care for the poor in New York City. Dr. Guion was a workaholic, not too unlike Dr. Adams in Guilford. And Dr. Guion was Dr. Adams' mentor, instilling really in Dr. Adams the same work ethic, such as making house calls. Dr. Adams even gave up a blooming practice in the city to find something different. So here was a country girl turned city girl that yearned for the country again. According to Dr. Adams, she and her mother, Dora, drove all along the Connecticut shoreline, searching. They prowled around Guilford. And they prowled particularly in Guilford because Dr. Adams knew that her paternal great-grandmother, 5 times, was Ann Leet Collins. And Ann Leet Collins had lived in the historic Collins House at number 205 State Street. And so it is, anybody who's a descendant of William Leet is a cousin of Dr. Adams, and she was very proud of that. In 1989, during the 350th anniversary of Guilford, Dr. Adams served on a committee with Betty Bullard to compile a booklet of descendants of the founders of Guilford. And that was given Dr. Adams' interest for sure. She herself was a descendant of an early founder. So at number 1 Whitfield Street, on the northwest corner of the Green, as we all know, it was for sale in 1950, and almost impetuously, Dr. Adams bought it. She found new roots in a country town with a population of 5,000 in 1950. In January of 1951, as you can see in this Shoreline Times article, Dr. Adams opened her practice. Part of the downstairs floor was renovated and created into little examining rooms. And Dr. Adams said she had tremendous remorse about moving to Guilford. She said, "I thought I was burning all my bridges in New York City," but she said this passed. Now, here's an interesting story that was passed on to me from Dr. Adams. I asked her about her first cases in Guilford. Well, she said, one of my first cases was for a young mother living on State Street with 3 small children. The woman went to bed with a bad headache, taking the preschooler with her. The 2 other children in kindergarten and 1st grade stayed up, and when the woman awakened, she found a horrible scene in the kitchen. The children had filled various saucepans with a gallon of paint and were trying to make colored popcorn on the stovetop. Hysterically, the mother called the telephone operator for a doctor, but there was no doctor in town. At least no doctor available at that time. Finally, the telephone operator said there was a new woman doctor in town, and she would send Dr. Adams. And Dr. Adams went right away, gave her patient a sedative, and cleaned up the mess in the kitchen. And, Dr. Adams asked the woman on state stage, who I don't know who it was, "What do I owe you?" The patient asked, "What do I owe you?" And Dr. Adams said nothing. And she said, "Are you sure?" "Oh, I'm sure, all right," Dr. Adams said, "provided you let me go back to New York City and tell my friends about my first case in Guilford." So, the historic plaque at 1 Whitfield Street helps ensure memories of the legendary Dr. Elisabeth Adams. In recent years, the plaque about the old tavern on the site was expanded to include the fact that Dr. Elizabeth C. Adams practiced in that house. So we are so lucky that soon after Dr. Adams' death, the administrator of her estate, Jean Rook, presented Dr. Adams' diaries for 8 years. A set has been given to the Adams School, and the Guilford Keeping Society has a set. And Dr. Adams, she had another whole rationale for keeping her diaries, which is another story. But this is the appearance of her diaries. Day by day for 7 or 8 years. They actually portray an incredibly good picture of her dedication and a range of activities. And on top, for example, is the December 2nd, 1979 entry. I think the second sentence says, "Police brought lady beaten by her husband, neighbor in with abdominal pain. At 11:30 p.m., a lad who ran his car into a telephone pole on River Street came in, sewed up lacerations on both sides of his mouth, and then brought him home." Now, I'm going to show you printed excerpts of the diary. And I don't want you to be alarmed or offer any criticism on this, because accompanying the diaries, Dr. Adams said these may be of no use and probably should be scrapped. There is nothing confidential in these as related to medicine. And that's in her own handwriting. So I share these, some entries coming up, but redacted names, last names. I still think they border a little bit on confidential, so we've been very careful in not distributing the diaries widely, but they are available. So I've made some translations, and you just have to appreciate, any of us would have dropped in our tracks, I think, if we could have even followed Dr. Adams for one day. And every day, day after day, we have entries like this. In 1971, fixed boy with a hand cut at Maple Shade. Frank was seen at 2 a.m. atop Attorney Carter's office with gas. At 4 a.m., Arden was pronounced dead on Long Hill Road. From there, I met Madison Ambulance at 4:30 a.m. at Flat Meadow Road and Route 77 and committed flow blank to Connecticut Valley. January 78, midnight, Donut Land with ambulance men, John Sanzoni and Joel Helander. She loved Donut Land. April 21st, 1978, visited Mrs. Veronica Blank early, and again at 6, RE nosebleeds. Took blood from a drunken driver at police station and dressed his old leg wound. Again in 78, called at 4 a.m. by police to pronounce a fatality at Bishop's Curve, where one Anthony Blank ran his Dodge into the big tree. To Donut Land and fetched coffee to John and Joel and George Sullivan. To Sperry Drive to a hallucinating lady. April 23rd, 1978, Officer Shiner here, RE eye infection. And then an injured fireman seen here. April 24th, went to Pearl Street and sent Emery Blank to the ER. Later, Sergeant Roach brought a boy who, while wrestling with another, broke one of Lapone's big glass windows and cut his hand. 2B blank to change catheter and arrange for Westlake Lodge after getting Title 19 clearance. April 30th, sewed up a chin laceration. May 2nd, committed one Michael to Connecticut Valley from police station. May 6th, 78, to police station to bandage a prisoner's finger cut on glass. To rec center for an eyelid burn from a gas stove. This goes on and on. 550 pages of diary. A kidney stone patient came groaning and was carried out by ambulance. May 11th, 1978. I hope Rick Hessler is here tonight, but I guess he isn't. Rode to and from grand rounds at Yale with Dr. Rick Hessler. And then, let's see. May 15th, met Genovese pharmacist who brought a penicillin for a patient to Donut Land. Now, that was a rendezvous spot. Gave him a bag of munchkins as a reward. May 21st, 1978, out at 4:30 a.m. to North Branford for rendezvous with police. Now, there was a time in my life, before I got into the emergency medical services, that I worked for Phil Dudley in the Shoreline Times. And on my little Instamatic camera, I took a lot of photographs, and I'm so glad I photographed this. This is an automobile accident. The photo was published in 1968, and can you see Dr. Adams? There she is, standing by, waiting for the extrication of the injured Ford Mustang driver on Route 77. I just interviewed one of the girls in that accident. It was a head-on collision involving a mother and 4 teenage girls in the same car after leaving Guilford High School. So my observation is that before 1972, when Guilford had its first EMTs and eventually paramedics, linked by radio to hospital-based emergency department physicians, the town had a Cadillac ambulance. And in those early years of the Guilford EMS system, we lagged behind the city. We relied on speed more than care. And there's stories about that Cadillac ambulance. After 1972, it became the opposite. I think it took Dr. Adams a while to get used to this. The fact that when we went to her house, which was a virtual emergency department, all hours of the day, we'd bring the patient out to the ambulance, we'd take blood pressure and vitals, and eventually starting IV lines and doing all kinds of things. And she'd come running out to the ambulance. Go, 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 go. And that happened all the time. But eventually, as we went into the paramedic world, things changed. Anyways, prior to 1972, she responded to motor vehicle accidents all over town, sometimes out of town. And she went to rescue squad calls all over Guilford. And after all, when I started thinking about it, she had been used to riding ambulances in New York City because her internship was at Bellevue Hospital, which had a very, very sophisticated ambulance service. And after all, in Guilford, she was made an honorary police chief and an honorary fire chief. I think so many of you here tonight who remember Doc Adams know that she had a flashing blue light on her car and a police radio. And I think some of us here tonight, such as Donnie Thompson, former Lieutenant Don Thompson of the police department, is he here tonight? Yeah, he remembers that, car 68 calling Guilford. Her voice cackling over the radio. Now, is there anybody here who can remember Dr. Adams' marker plate on her little brown Volkswagen Bug?
Steve.
Steve. I was looking to Stephen Dudley because...
AP 1981.
I think you're right, AP 1981. Why Stephen Dudley and I are the only people east of the Mississippi to remember that is beyond me. AP 1981. So there are stories and legends about her fast responses to calls, such as the time she responded to the town hall for report of a heart attack patient. Traffic around the green was jammed. I don't know if it was a little folks fair or maybe it was the Agricultural Society fair, but she took the path of least resistance, jumped the curve, and many people have related this story, drove up over the curbing and diagonally across the green. So, I suppose when we look at this, she put her New York driving skills to practice in Guilford. Now, Connie Merman, who knew Doc Adams very well, as so many people in town did, told me whenever Dr. Adams roared up Fair Street, their family knew she was passing through because she was always in second gear. It was her favorite gear. Now, so these interviews can go on and on. So you want to talk to Jerry Dosty at Jerry's Transmission? He can probably tell you how many times she had a new transmission put in her car. And then eventually they made sure that she had an automatic transmission. So until Dr. Adams' retirement, Dr. Adams was Guilford's long-serving director of health for the town of Guilford. And a former town engineer reminisced that Dr. Adams waged a full-time war against failing sewage disposal systems in Guilford. She was very forceful in her actions and to bring property owners into compliance with the state code, especially with discharges into Long Island Sound. In Sachem's Head, homeowners were subjected to unannounced backyard visits. On one occasion, somebody told me that Doc Adams sat on a boat during the night to watch the discharge of waste into the Sound from an uncooperative restaurant owner. So here's one of her interesting diary entries. Early a.m., observed sewage at Lapone House and phoned Lapone. And this is quite funny. To Great Hill Road in North Guilford about the silly horse manure complaint. So somebody had called the director of health about manure. And that's why we have an agricultural commission in Guilford to this day, I think. We didn't have one back then. So this is another whole dimension of Dr. Adams' life, taking care of patients, but also as director of health. Her duties took her into many different spheres. Her diary entries continually refer to her treks across the green early in the morning, and her diary says, carrying my little pouch of papers for the engineering department. Well, come to find out, I found out that in her role as director of health, she also had to certify that lots in new housing subdivisions were buildable. She had to walk every lot with the town engineer, at that time it was Jim Portley, to determine if the land could accommodate a septic system by reviewing test pits for percolation rate. In fact, she had one room in her house dedicated to her director of health responsibilities in the town engineering department. We all know that Dr. Adams was decisive and sometimes, as I had referred to earlier, very impetuous in her actions. It commanded instant respect from all. One would never cross Dr. Adams. In my earliest years of working for the town ambulance service, my office was out of the 911 dispatch center in the basement of the Guilford Town Hall. One time, Dr. Adams' complaint about peeling paint on the town hall front doors apparently fell on deaf ears. And one early morning, and I do remember this, before her first appointment with patients, she marched across the green with her staff, washed the doors, prepped the doors, and painted them. Now, this is a very interesting entry. Dr. Adams loved flowers. And May 13th, 1978, to breakfast at 6:15 with Leslie and Ted Potter to walk in their woods by West River with them and their dog, Panda. Saw carpets of wild violets, anemones, Many read trilliums, cowslips, and fiddleheads, picked the latter, and took bouquets to several. The former owner, oh, no, not yet. The former owner of the Madison Flower Shop said that Doc Adams was a regular patron there, racking up endless bills for flowers that she'd send to patients and others. Now, many people here have probably heard of Dr. Adams' affinity with a flower, or an invasive species, I guess you'd say, is skunk cabbage. That wild odoriferous plant that crops up in swamps in early spring. This was even a topic for Yankee magazine, an article about Dr. Adams in March of 1986, if you want to look it up. It's very interesting. Well, I just have a cherished memory, as so many of you do tonight, and that's why we're going to hopefully carve out some time for your memories. But I have a memory of going on a skunk cabbage hunt with Dr. Adams. And she told me it was one of her favorite secret spots. My diary tells about it, March 1st, 1985. Dr. Adams called me. I was living on Norton Avenue. And she'd asked me if I would like to accompany her on a hunt. She said to skip right over to Westlake Lodge, where she had been seeing patients, where I could meet her. She said I should bring, quote, a little sweater, because I would need that. We met and rode in my car to a secluded spot in Upper Moose Hill Road. And here a little brook runs parallel to the road. She traipsed ahead of me, wearing a plaid skirt, brown boots, plastic bags over both hands, and yes, a little sweater. There were skimmings of ice on the brook and dimpled patches of snow everywhere that marked her treasured plant. So I carried the bucket and the trowel, and I did the digging, but she did the searching. She referred to, quote, and this is in my diary, the beautiful pyramids of the cabbage, and particularly one of those. She also wanted moss. She said beautiful moss, as she called it. But before bedtime that evening, I found on my front doorstep at Norton Avenue 3 pie plates filled with water, fresh moss, and 11 skunk cabbage plants. Now, she referred to them as her potted skunk cabbage. And she delivered these to residents all over town, and mostly the convalescent home. And believe it or not, in her diary, and I've been told this, potted skunk cabbage appeared one Sunday on the altar of St. George Church. So as many of you know here, Dr. Adams just abhorred the use of alcohol and smoking of any type. She was very outspoken. And she would distribute these little verses, often with her own illustration. And these would be distributed to patients. Tobacco is a dirty weed. 'Twas the devil did plant the seed. It stains the teeth and soils the clothes and makes a smokestack of the nose. So in time a smoker must breathe O2 through a hose. But her message got through. And then here's another little satire on the vice of smoking drawn by the doctor. Retired Police Lieutenant Don Thompson, who's here tonight and I referred to, relates that police officers in Guilford were required to have their annual physicals with Dr. Adams. And that was an experience. Because many of the smokers among them on the police force actually dreaded the visit. I think they would have rather have been dispatched to a bank for a holdup than receiving one end of a stern lecture. And she would confiscate your cigarettes, and if you didn't have them on you, she'd ask you to go to the car and bring them in, and she'd destroy them. So Doc Adams nurtured and encouraged new doctors to come to town, such as the late Dr. Brian McGrath, a dermatologist. Dr. McGrath and his wife lived for a year or two on the third floor of Dr. Adams' mansion house and interned with her after medical school beginning in 1959. If Carol McGrath is with us tonight, she may have some stories as well.
She's right here.
Good. So I think we all know what happened in 1970. The two middle schools in Guilford were christened with names. The brand new Abraham Baldwin Middle School was christened with its name, and the middle school, which had formerly been the high school, and in my day, the Guilford Junior High School, became the Dr. Elisabeth C. Adams Middle School. So in the Shoreline Times of September 1970, there's front page coverage about handing over the keys to the school, and Duncan Craig, Principal Duncan Craig, whose daughter is here tonight, presented the key and a dozen red roses at an opening assembly. And I will tell you, Duncan Craig was like a father figure to Dr. Adams. Dr. Adams said that she must live up to the honor of her name and for the school. Dr. Adams once made a remark with regard to the school carrying her name, saying, "I've really done nothing other than to complete each day's work so as to start the next day's work." Yet she was enormously proud, as we all know, of her namesake school and gave endless attention to its students and faculty. Upon accepting the honor in 1970, she wrote the following to the Guilford Board of Education. "This challenge I accept only with the expectancy and hope that each person who learns of this matter, that matter being the naming of the school, will be moved to strive the more to make his or her individual name be counted for even higher ideals." Elisabeth C. Adams. Principal Duncan Craig and later Principal Carl Balistraci loved Dr. Adams with all their hearts. They invited her to many school functions, and here she watches the boys' soccer team in action, the Adams Raiders. In Carl Balistraci's remarkable reminiscences about Dr. Adams, Carl related that in the 1950s and 60s, the doctor maintained standing credit in her account at his parents' grocery store, Carl's Market, on Route 1, near Church Street. And Carl called her, quote, "a one-person welfare department, packing up bags of groceries for patients who needed them the most every week." It's been a challenge trying to find photos of Dr. Adams, but I think many people have them, and I think between the library and the Keeping Society and myself, we'd be interested in any good photos of Doc Adams that you might have. Here she accepts the Guilford J.C.'s Distinguished Service Award in 1967. Dr. Adams attended assemblies and concerts and any event imaginable at her school, often honored by receiving bouquets of flowers. Attention was riveted on Dr. Adams in 1987, already a living legend, when she stepped up to the podium in Adams School. The occasion was the 50th anniversary celebration of the Adams School building. Seated in the back are Superintendent of Schools Robert Morrison, First Selectman Frank Larkins, GHS, the high school co-principal Carl Balistraci, and way over to the right, Principal Duncan Craig. And Dr. Adams, of course, addressed the body assembled. Dr. Adams embraced her school. She once said that although she didn't have grandchildren, all the students of Adams School were her grandchildren. In 1990, the 350 students of Adams School and faculty marched in a parade from the school to Guilford Town Hall to surprise Dr. Adams on the occasion of her 40th year in Guilford. The band played, and the school chorus serenaded her. Dr. Adams stood on Guilford Green holding hands with Principal Duncan Craig facing the gathering. And this article tells about that. And the front page of the Shoreline Times captured her delight, which is clear. The legendary doctor is standing on the green, clapping in front of the Guilford Historic Marker. In 1992, at an event in the Adams School, this is only 2 years before her death, the Guilford Board of Education composed this song of thanks to Dr. Adams. I don't think you can probably see it all there. The words anyway, it goes, consider yourself at home, consider yourself part of the Board of Ed. We've taken you so strong, it's clear. We've needed you all along. Consider yourself worth much. Consider yourself more than $1 million. We ain't got a dime to spare, who cares? When all of your heart we share, and so on. Around this same time, Rick Hessler also wrote a very moving song about Dr. Adams. So we've probably all heard of Dr. Adams' tradition of sending personal notes or cards to every single student in the Adams School. And I've taken an extract from her diary. The second sentence, after having dinner with Helen and Norman Knowles, and Helen and Norman Knowles' granddaughter's here tonight, and I think probably your parents too. Yeah, of course. She wrote, in her diary, wrote all 550 names of students, faculty, and workers on Xmas cards for the school. And here is one note written to Amy Palouse. I don't know if Amy's here tonight. One student in the Adams School in 1990. Dear Amy Palouse, Amy is now Amy Palouse Earls. Congratulations to you for being a leading scholar. To have your name on that list means that you have been doing good work. Best wishes to you for the holidays and for time ahead. Sincerely, Elisabeth C. Adams, Guilford, Connecticut, 9 December 91. Many of her notes, perhaps not so much to students, end with sincerely, Elisabeth C. Adams, Guilford, Connecticut, USA, planet Earth. We never quite knew why she added that, and I don't think we ever asked her. So Sharon Craig Criscolo, who's here tonight, and Jim Papa and Cheryl Robertson at the Adams School really took me into their care and showing me Dr. Adams' materials. The school has inaugurated a program called the CARES program, C-A-R-E-S. C stands for community, attitude, A, R, respect, E for effort, and then scholarship. And these are attributes that Dr. Adams lived by and encouraged within the school. And I am so moved by this, as I think all of you will be, because every faculty member carries around a coupon book of these CARES coupons. And whenever a student exemplifies these attributes, the ideals of Dr. Adams, the student receives a coupon. And the coupons are deposited into a drop box in the central office, and I'm told quarterly a ceremony is held to recognize these students. Returning to the 1965 portrait again, Dr. Adams embraced the entire community. She could spot specific needs, both great and small, and rally for the cause, such as her vision for what developed as a Meals on Wheels program in Guilford. She was a person of vision and concern, of rare stamina and energy. She once told me that her secret good fortune was requiring only 4 or 5 hours of sleep each night, allowing her to do all that she did in the course of one day. She loved her community and was involved with many of its nonprofits. At 85 years of age, Dr. Adams wanted to go to Faulkner's Island. So George Godovan of the building department at that time, and Kim and Rich Steffen, Rich was in the engineering department, brought her out to Faulkner's in their launch, and here they are landing at the island, and of course Doc Adams had a dress, and she brought a pitcher of lemonade. It's really a cute picture. Many people in Guilford remembered August 18th as Dr. Adams' birthday, and here the senior citizens honor her in the community center on August 18th. I want to share two treasured photos that I have of Dr. Adams with myself, and I have these framed in my house. This one is outside the former convalescent home for reasons that I cannot recall, but I think she was discussing a patient. But you can see Dr. Adams' small stature. And again, I don't know the occasion, but I treasure the photo. I'm not even sure I know who took it. But this is another occasion that I think about all the time. On my 40th birthday, August 21st, 1991, the town hall gave me a surprise party. I was still working for the emergency medical service and noticed the black balloons and the black crepe, and the room went silent when Dr. Adams arrived. And I threw down my sandwiches, which is behind me. And Dr. Adams appeared, and she presented a card and a poem, and she was very good at writing verse, as you know, and read the poem. Does anybody remember the Guilford Fair Day Parade of 2007? Well, Jill Losey of Nutmeggers Chimney Sweeps, I don't think Jill's here, impersonated Dr. Adams in the parade. And it really created quite a stir. It was a hit. And as you can see in this photo, she captured it all. She got it right. She got it right with the medical bag. She got it right with the open sandals. Dr. Adams had open sandals and a short gray hair, skirt, stethoscope, and following her were bandaged patients, some with crutches. Now, I have a treat for you all tonight. Dr. Adams' spirituality embraced all churches and all faiths. When my father was a deacon in the First Congregational Church of Guilford, he suggested that Dr. Adams be invited to give the sermon on what was called Layman's Sunday. It was an opportunity for a layperson to deliver the sermon. Dr. Adams accepted. The date was Sunday, October 19th, 1969. I recorded it on a big Webcore reel-to-reel tape recorder. This evening, I'm going to play Dr. Adams. I doubt if anybody's heard her voice recently. There may be other audio recordings. This is particularly good. I brought it to a studio in Westbrook and we enhanced it. And I'm only going to play 4 minutes of it. It's a 20-minute sermon. And but we're going to bring the legendary doctor's voice and thoughts into this room. It starts very abruptly. Let's see. I'm trying to think how it starts. Okay, I don't remember the first sentence, but it starts very abruptly. I do have a volume control here if I need to turn it up. Let me just refresh myself if I need to turn up the volume. I'm going to hit the on button. Escape. Okay, Danielle, it's the speaker icon, right, that I would hit if I need to go up loud. So let's see how we do this.
An address by a layman was stipulated in the bulletin this morning.
Can't go louder.
Rather than a sermon. For who am I to address you good Christians who have come here, and what I will say will be but to cite in the words of others prayer and praise. However Layman's Sunday began, it now serves a purpose in heightening the appreciation of all of us to the efforts and accomplishments of the ministers of this church. It would be interesting to hear what each one of you would say were you to replace me at this moment in this very spot. You will not hear from me of Biafra or Vietnam or matters of poverty, race, youth, or crime. Each of us is free to crusade or to join a crusade of his own interests. Here may we find some enlargement and enrichment of the faith which motivates and sustains us, whether in crusades, against the troubles of our times, or in our daily workaday duties. My daily workaday duties for several years have been the practice of medicine, during which I have seen much of sickness, of sorrow, of suffering, of striving, of sacrifice. I would bring you an impression which I have gained. It is this: the people who meet best these situations which we all encounter sometime during our lives, more or less, sooner or later, are the people who have a religious faith which is well rooted and grounded, or in the language of the computer, well programmed. Many years ago, on the wall of a Sunday school room in a little country church was a chart with 4 headings in large print, with appropriate Bible verses under each. Looking at this chart Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, was imprinted in my mind these headings, which have come before me clearly many times since then. They are prayer, promise, precept, and praise. The promise being the assurance that our prayer is heard, the precept giving us direction. It is with the hope of imprinting more deeply upon our minds, or giving nourishment and enrichment to our faith, or adding to the data in our computers, material which may, from time to time, give yields.
I really hated to cut it off, but that's the part of the tape. One other example of Dr. Adams' spirituality I really wanted to mention tonight, and we'll be done in another 5 or 6 minutes when we can share stories. I'm taking this from my diary, and I remember it very well. It was July 20th, 1976. My EMT partner and myself were dispatched to 85 Fair Street for the report of an unconscious woman. It was the little district schoolhouse at 85 Fair Street, where the unforgettable Guilford personality Dorothy Seidler lived. She lived alone. And we arrived, and Dorothy Seidler was seated at the dinner table, deceased, fully dressed, with a full teacup at her place setting, and she'd been there obviously several hours. And there was really nothing we could do to help. Dr. Adams came along in just minutes, took one look, grabbed my hand and grabbed my partner's hand and said, "Let's say the Lord's Prayer together." I'm telling you, that's just doesn't leave me. I think about that all the time. So anyway, in older age, as this photo reflects, this was taken from the Adams School Yearbook, 94 to 95. Dr. Adams made the difficult decision to retire at the age of 82. She yearned for the support of the community to step down from her practice and sell her house. This was a wrenching decision, and she was very unsettled about it. And in making the final decision to retire and sell her house, she told me this. This was actually in an interview. She said, quote, "Athletes train their muscles for competition. People have to train their minds for change. Decisions are very difficult. Guilford gets to be part of your anatomy. When you tear yourself from it, the wound heals." And that was a lot of her advice throughout her life. You know, she could give good advice, like scripture from the Bible, let not your heart be troubled. Or she wrote a whole treatise once on advancing age and how to deal with advancing age. That was delivered to the Unitarian Church in Madison. That's a very, very interesting sermon that she gave. And she had a very good way of dealing with death, such as comparing our mortal lives with little boats going down a stream. I can hear her telling me about this. I was very upset about a man's death in Guilford, Tad Smith, the science smith who did the science for the Guilford Keeping Society. Tad Smith died very suddenly. And Dr. Adams told me, well, I'd like to think of our lives as little boats going down a stream. There's eddies and strong currents and side pools, and some boats get caught up, but all the boats arrive at the same destination, but at different times. So that's the way she could bring her spirituality to her practice or in any situation. So in transition, Dr. Adams lived for a short while at 14 High Street near the Guilford Green after selling her house. And she moved on to a retirement community at Covenant Village in Cromwell, Connecticut. But she was lonely. And as she said, I was so tired of people telling me about their grandchildren. And the only grandchildren I have are at Adams School. And a lot of my cousins. And in retirement, she had a tough time of this. Dr. Wardner in the Cornell class told me that. We all saw that with Dr. Adams. So she returned to Guilford in 1989 and bought this cute little cape at 232 South Union Street. Dr. Adams last resided at Evergreen Woods Retirement Home in North Branford. On July 8th, 1994, I have one more story to tell you. Cannot forget this. Everybody has their stories, but this is my story. 5 days before her sudden death, the 911 dispatcher in Guilford called me up and said that Dr. Adams wanted to see my old farmhouse that was being restored by Jonathan Worth. It was undergoing a full restoration. The house was a bustle of activity. It was uninhabitable. The workmen were hammering and sawing, but Dr. Adams came down with the 911 dispatcher. She toured every room of the house, upstairs and down. And after a while, she startled everybody. She shouted that almost caused alarm. "Come here, quickly. Everybody, come here." And all the workmen dropped everything they were doing. And I'm going to show you what she did. Now, this is classic Dr. Adams. She was always for the underdog. Whether it was an underprivileged person who needed a meal or needed groceries or needed spiritual aid, or skunk cabbage. She bent down, and everybody was huddled around her, and at that point we could see she was okay. And she stooped over a pile of sawdust. And I can't exactly do it tonight, but she picked out of that pile this huge wood shaving that was in the pile. This can't match the beauty of it, but I'm trying to demonstrate what went on. And this is classic Dr. Adams. And she held it up to the light. Everybody quick, come over to the window light. Look at this. Isn't it beautiful? Isn't this beautiful? And she, do you have a magnifying glass? No, we didn't have a magnifying glass. Can I bring this home? Well, of course you could bring it home, Dr. Adams. And the day after her death, they found it on the top of her bedroom dresser. She had taken it home. And so that's another story. So on July 13th, 1994, 5 days after that, Dr. Adams was stricken in her Evergreen Woods apartment. At 9:30 p.m., her close friend and former secretary, Barbara Fredericks, with husband Roger, brought her to Middlesex Memorial Hospital in their car. And in the ER, Dr. Adams offered a diagnosis what was happening. An ultrasound proved she was right. She knew exactly what was happening. She requested, according to Barbara Fredericks, no extreme measures and told her that she had had a long, happy life. While being sedated for intubation, Dr. Adams went into respiratory and cardiac arrest and died. She'd been in the ER only 1 hour. And so many times that I'd met her at times of death, she thought it was a blessing to have a kiss of death. And Dr. Adams had a kiss of death. It was a 4 or 5 hour illness that night. Dr. Adams was laid to rest. I took this in 1982, before she was interred, of course, next to her parents in Wilsboro, New York. So this evening, we pause to honor and remember a great American. And if one's, or even one, a part of one's immortality is practicing service above self and serving humanity, Dr. Adams' immortality is assured. And I thank you. Don, did you have something? Former Lieutenant Don Thompson.
I'd like to say I first met Dr. Adams when we were young boys. I had a friend who lived in the house right next to him. We were in the backyard running around, and somehow we got over to her property. She stepped on some of the flowers. And she come out of the yard, I guess. She saw us. She come over, introduced ourselves, asked us who we were, and she kind of said, please, we'll have to be careful next time. And then she turned around and went, and we stayed out in the yard. A little while later, she could back out. She called us over. She gave us each a cookie. Yeah. And then, you can't say no about her, how great she was. I remember one time, I was dispatched to her office. They said, go assist Dr. Adams. Not an emergency, just go help her. So I went there, and she met me at the door. And she had, I can't remember which wrist, but one of her wrists she had wrapped in a towel or something. And she says, I would like you to take me over to exit 56. A lady friend of mine will pick me up there and take me to the hospital. I said, Doc, we can take you to the hospital. She says, no. Just do as I ask and come back and go. And when I left her off, I said, you'll be out of service for a while? She says, no. I'll call you when I get back. And about, what was it, any more than 2-3 hours later, she was back. She said, I'm back. And she worked right through with a broken wrist. She was a great lady. Unbelievable.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, in later years, in retirement, she did break her hip, as some of you probably know.
I have not a memory of Dr. Adams, but I'm Jacob Lilla, my husband Gary, and we live across the street from Adams Middle School, and my wonderful principal. Catherine Walker and Sharon. I've worked with a lot of you. And living across the street from Adams has been a joy. I love it when I'm retired now, but I love it when the kids go in the morning, and I love it when they come out. But it's a wonderful school because everybody knows everybody. It's not too big. And anyway, it's just, I've done art about it. We love living across the street from it. And I think about her all the time, though I never knew her personally.
Thank you. We're remiss in not mentioning that Catherine Walker is here tonight, principal of the Adams School. Did you follow Carl Belstreesky?
Yes.
I thought so. Yes, Catherine. Bob.
Yeah, Bob Dolan here. I was on Goose Lane, and I was giving a tennis lesson, and I heard a huge crash. I never forget it, and I ran up with my student, and the car was there, and the driver got out. He wasn't hurt, but he should have been hurt. And then a short time later, Dr. Adams showed up. Well, the first aid of the ambulance, they came late. But in the meantime, while we were waiting for the ambulance, Dr. Adams started directing traffic. She simply directed traffic.
Not surprised.
And so I knew her personally anyhow. She was a close friend of Muriel Markham, Billy Markham's mom.
Yeah.
And we had often had dinner or lunch together with Dr. Markham and Mrs. Markham. Anyhow, she was a very small person, but I think that basically you could call her the mayor of Guilford.
Mm. Married to medicine. Thanks, Bob. Somebody else wanted to say something? Yes.
My name is Bud Ural, and I remember Dr. Adams. She was the only doctor in town we had, and she went there when we were little kids, and of course then they branched out with Dr. Merman and Cunningham and Wakeman, and I think it was amazing how she handled everything, you know. So, and I remember you, of course.
You know, on Facebook, was it on Facebook? I think it was Simply Guilford. Somebody offered the reminiscence about a family member who was burned, steam cleaning, had first-degree burns all over their body. Now, Dr. Adams could also be practical, but also very adept in delivering good medical care. But when this person went into Dr. Adams' office, according to what I read on Simply Guilford, she said, now what I want you to do is go up to Lake Quannapock and jump in the lake. And apparently that person did, and that's exactly what they needed, cold water immersion for a first-degree burn. So, another story. These stories are endless. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ellen Brubeck. Joel, thank you very much for being here and for hosting this event. My heart goes out to both you and Dr. Adams. She kept me healthy and you kept me alive. You saved my life on November 3rd, 1978. Thank you.
We'll check Dr. Adams' diary. Yeah, Don, thank you.
I'll say one more thing about her school. She always used to love to go up to their activities, and when they were inside, she sat in the auditorium. She always sat up near the entrance. So if we needed her, we wouldn't have to disrupt anything. We just go in and tap her on the shoulder and do what she had to do.
Yes. Yes. You know, before we close, one more thing I want to pull out. Anybody know what these are? Oh, you brought yours.
Actually, I can say something too.
Vanessa Knowles.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about these?
Yeah, so these were just ubiquitous in my childhood. So I was one of her grandchildren, except I didn't go to Adams while she was alive. So I'm Vanessa Knowles Charette now.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hello. So Dr. Adams, I thought she was just a family friend of ours. Like I didn't know she knew everybody. So I thought she was my third grandma. She'd come to my birthday parties, and she was really good at making us, me and my siblings and cousins, feel like we were hers, like just hers. You know, I remember going to that little house you showed, and I went to the Evergreen Woods, and I have probably somewhere some of her belongings.
14 High Street to her. She rented from us.
And she rented from us, yeah.
Right.
But these are probably hiding in like every book I started and didn't finish reading in high school and middle school, and I cherished them because she passed when I was just before I started at Adams. I think 2 years before I started there. So I remember going there being like, I knew her. She was mine. And people are like, what? Like, because kids.
And she made these.
And yes, she made every single one of these. I'll show you. The one end has a circle, which sometimes had eyeballs on it, and sometimes did not. These do not. And the other end is a loop. And if you're a kid, you always stick one through the other and make it into a bracelet. Yes, it's a bookmark, but it's not always a bookmark. It was a bracelet.
Yeah, in her lonely years at Cromwell Village, at Covenant Village, she'd come down to Guilford. She could literally go to anybody's house and sometimes spend the night and would knit. So she knit these bookworms. She could crash at Grace Dudley's house. She could crash at Ellie Sears' house. She could crash at Charlotte Frey's house. She could go anywhere in town, any household, any patient. They were all our best friends. Anything else, and then we'll close. Yes.
I lived in Vermont. My name is Marge Vogt, and Dr. Adams banked at the bank that I worked at. And I didn't know Dr. Adams, but I had to call her in late '92 about a business question for her. And while we were talking, she spoken to me. And I told her I was going to be moving to Connecticut. And so she said, when are you moving? And I said, I'm coming in February of '93. And she said, well, when you reach Connecticut, when you come, because my husband's going to be working at St. Raphael's Hospital, she said, call me when you come. Well, she was just a customer, so I never called her. And about 3 months after February 3rd, on my husband's desk at his office at St. Raphael's was a note from Dr. Adams saying, your wife spoke to me on the phone, and please have her call me. So I did, and she was so sweet to me, and she wanted to introduce me to Guilford, and she used to take my husband and me around in the car and show us all Guilford. And I have several of her little bookmarks and with little poems on them.
What is your last name again?
Marge Vogt, my last name.
Okay.
And the first thing she gave me was your book. So I have your book about Guilford from Dr. Adams, and I used to go to her place, and she was the first person I met when I came to Connecticut.
Thank you. She loved Guilford history, and one of her early patients was Charles D. Hubbard, the noted author and artist. And Dr. Adams, on her stenography machine, made a recording of Charles Hubbard. And I have that disc, but it has to be enhanced. But she loved Guilford history.
Hey, Joel.
Sure, yes, in the back.
Well, I didn't have many experiences with Dr. Adams, but of course, if you grew up here, you knew all about her, and you just knew that there she was. And so it was the summer of '73 or '74, I believe. I had driven a school bus. I used to do deliveries for...
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm John Morgan.
Okay.
I used to live on Church Street, and then moved to Madison, and then great places beyond that. Anyway, the summer of '73 or '74, I was delivering school buses for Jack Beebe down to Florida, and I spent an afternoon on sailing on Tampa Bay with somebody from Guilford that I delivered something to, and Big Long was bored that he was going to turn into a table for somebody. And I got a blistering sunburn because I thought nothing of the sun down there because I'm used to getting brown up here. So I got a huge, terrible sunburn. Flew back into Hartford that night, The next day, I couldn't keep a shirt on. The next day, I was living up off 77, and I was just getting worse and worse and pounding things in my pain. Finally, I went to see Dr. Adams, and she very matter-of-factly took a look and basically gave me a prescription for antihistamine pills and sent me on my way. And I don't know if it was $10 or $5 or what, but it was in the middle of a Saturday night at 9:30, and that experience, because then suddenly, it took away the pain, and she explained to me why that would happen. And I would say that I have never had it's ruined for me for all doctors, because every doctor has been that simple, that direct, that fast, and matter-of-fact and friendly.
These are wonderful memories. Dr. Adams went to my mother's house up on Tender Marsh Road to administer to my father. I don't know what it was for. But as she was leaving, she saw my mother in the garden picking string beans. And she'd asked my mother if she'd had a recent tetanus shot. And my mother said no. Well, she said, let's give you one right now in the garden. And one more, and Stephen, I'll tell you, these stories go on and on. I asked my brother Forrest what his memory of Dr. Adams is. I only went to her once. He said, I had a little dimple or pimple on my ear, and Dr. Adams said, that's nothing to worry about. It's a sebaceous cyst, and aren't you glad it's not on the end of your nose? Stephen.
Joel, the thing that I remember most is that everybody in town was grateful when she got rid of her Plymouth and got her Volkswagen, because she looked through the steering wheel. Yeah. Better chance of her seeing over it with the cushion in the Volkswagen. And the other thing is, as my grandparents got older, her comments were, somebody made a comment about it never rained, but it poured, and she says, we're not there yet, but it's misting heavily.
Well, there was a time when, I don't know if Donnie Thompson remembers this, there's a time when I thought the police commissioner, maybe other officials, wanted to put a caution sign in front of her house for when she jettisoned out of there in her VW. But she'd go anywhere at any time of the day. Yes.
Yeah. When Fred and I were newly starting our store on the Green, we were both teaching, and we were building shelves at 2 o'clock in the morning with our young son in a playpen in the store. And I put a nail through my knee. Well, where do you go? You go down to Dr. Adams, and she, no Novocaine, nothing. She fixed it and gave me a tetanus shot, but then she also gave Fred a tetanus shot, the baby a tetanus shot, whether you needed it or not.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, yes.
Hi, Joel. I'm Dr. Kimberly Adams. My
husband, Kim. Yes.
Dr. Mark Detman and I bought her house.
Yes.
She was part of our family.
Was that 87, 88?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I wanted to thank you for this beautiful tribute to her.
Yeah. Yes. Well, she loved you, and you're a descendant of John Quincy Adams, as she was,
right.
And she claimed you as a distant cousin.
We found that we were related.
Yeah.
The huge Henry Adams tome that she had, I don't know if you ever saw that. She had this huge book of Henry Adams and his descendants. He had 13 children. That was back in 1660. So we found each other, that we were descended from the same.
She felt so good that you found her home.
We loved her.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight. Where do you live now?
We're up in Vermont.
Yeah. And you were with Dr. Perina for a while, weren't you? As an ophthalmologist. Yeah. With that, if anybody has stories, we'd like to hear them. Thank you so much.